Black women delivering mail during World War II. That is the premise of a Netflix movie that dropped just the other day, or, well, no, they didn't actually deliver the mail, because that would put them in danger of something more significant than a broken nail or a twisted ankle. They sort the mail. And even the during World War II is a pinch misleading, as the main thrust of the story takes place within 4 months of the war's end, in England, where the most pressing danger the ladies are faced with is sorting the mail in an unheated building. Not to put too fine a point on it, but this plot sounds thinner than an anorexic at a food expulsion convention. So how exactly did Netflix manage to milk 2 hours out of this? Surely that must be a feat equivalent to getting milk from a polar bear. Oh wait. A film by Tyler Perry. Alright. We're not trying to milk a polar bear here, but a black bear, as this gentleman is a race grifter par excellence, of such prolific nature and expertise that even his fellow racial ideologues call him out for playing too heavily on black stereotypes. Right then, I can already feel the blunt as a brick script slapping me in the face, so let's move through the expectations list, shall we? An interracial relationship with a black mother says she needs to find herself a nice black boy? Check. Aforementioned relationship then subsequently ending tragically with the death of the white boy, and the girl finding indeed herself a nice racially pure mate with which to continue the race? Check. We're victimized just because we're black? Check. Whitey be cheating us, yo? Check. A pinch of racial superiority with a drizzle of victimhood? Natürlich, mein Herr. And of course, evil, made-up white guy that just really wants to keep a sister down? Oh, who am I kidding? Check, check, and check. You know, it's actually kind of refreshing to see a piece of entertainment where not a single one of my expectations have been subverted at any level. Man, if Netflix paid half as much care to the rest of their streaming lineup as they did to race grifting, we would still be in the golden age of entertainment. And I do mean race grifting here. So, without further ado, the proof of the pudding is always in the eating, so let us dive right in, shall we? The movie begins with a movie I would much rather be watching, even with the P-51s flying at treetop height, and the Germans and the American soldiers fighting a war as if it was Waterloo. Popping across the pond real quick then, we see our main character, Lena, and her white boy toy, whose name is utterly irrelevant for reasons already mentioned. Lena's mother is none too fond of her daughter dating a dirty white boy, of course, but strangely, the boy's family, who must be from some serious upper crust to have the kid have his own car already at the age of like 18 or something, apparently have no objections to him trying to hammer the help. Oh well, again, he dies literally before the movie even begins, so like Mummy Lena said, let's hurry up and replace him with a more racially acceptable candidate, whom she meets when she signs up to the army, or more correctly, the Women's Army's Auxiliary Corps. And this is where we get to the ever more monstrously abused phrase, based on a true story. Which, you know, this is sort of kind of correct in the same way that shoving a jackhammer up your ass and flipping the on switch is a prostate massage. Both cases take significant liberties with the truth, and the results are roughly equally messy and discomforting. See, there was an excellent opportunity here to tell a story of some worth. Firstly, by focusing in on the extremely unwelcome nature of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps as a general entity. Basically, nobody wanted it. The idea was first aired largely as a political stunt, intended to have no more than 10 or so thousand women be trained to be switchboard operators. A profession already heavily dominated by women. In fact, my own grandmother was a switchboard operator way back in the day. But irrelevant piece of trivia aside, the idea gained quite a lot of steam when it became both politically and practically expedient, both as a win for women's liberation and as a way of freeing up men for the war that the United States now found itself in. You know, after that rather unfortunate Christmas present the Japanese delivered at Pearl Harbor. At first, a requirement goal of 25,000 volunteers was set, but this was, quite unexpectedly so, exceeded, and Roosevelt decided to authorize the enlistment of 150,000 volunteers. These were all given 8 weeks of basic training and then sorted into 3 professions. The best were switchboard operators, the second best were maid mechanics, and everyone else was shunted off to bakeries. Later, they were also allowed to be drivers, clerks, and postal workers. The WAAC, the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, was heavily opposed by, as mentioned, damn near everyone. The civilian sector viewed it as an enormous imposition for these barely trained, frankly, women to come in and start taking over the jobs previously staffed by civilians. And the army hated it dearly for 2 primary reasons. One was that it was viewed as deeply immoral for the army to employ women at all. Women were supposed to be protected from war. What kind of future were the men fighting for if even their wives and daughters could be dragged into the war effort? And secondly, because the WAAC received ranks the equal of male soldiers and officers, despite not being required to carry out the same duties. Thus, a WAAC lieutenant that would never be in danger of seeing so much as the rearmost lines of a battlefield was the legal equal of men, expected to fight and die if so ordered. Hardly an enormous shock that this should breed some pretty serious resentment. And there was a lot of resentment too. The movie could, for example, have focused on a rather infamous newspaper article alleging that the women in the WAAC would be given contraceptives to prevent them from getting pregnant, as one of the leading rumors were that the WAAC was filled with sluts, slides, and officers' mattresses. But, of course, if we were to do that, we would miss out on the all-important racial aspect of the movie, and we can't have that. And so we get to see segregation, which was the rule back then, and about, 7 repetitions of variants of the line, "We're black women, and so we have to be better than everybody else." And this too would at least be excusable. This is set in the 40s. Of course there would have been racism and sexism, no doubt about it. And if we just had that and focused on how the 6th AAA actually solved their mission, how to sort through the massive backlog of mail that had been stacking up since Normandy, and the many clever solutions they came up with to track down the correct recipients, then that could have been enjoyable, at least in a logistical sort of way. Like how they created reference cards for units and soldiers, so that they could cross-check their numbers with names and locations, to figure out, for example, when John Smith was intended to go to John Smith over here instead of John Smith over there. But instead, we get a story near completely focused on the skin color of our cast, as they are constantly persecuted by the evil white general, who tries to get them torpedoed and expects them to march and to work with mittens. Mittens, the monster! I mean, can you believe it? These women were chilly, goddammit! Their massive English countryside estate wasn't even heated. If only those silly, racist, sexist, and abusive white men knew what it was like to be so uncomfortable. I mean, what were those silly white soldiers even doing at this point? Fighting in the Ardennes forests? Battle of the Bulge? If they only knew the terrible trial of needing to sort mail with mittens on. Yeah. The movie does not exactly score points with having the characters whinge about the temperature, at the same time that about 150,000 plus men were killed or injured in the Ardennes in the dead of winter. Oh, and the worst part of it all, the mean general and his racist chaplain he dispatches to chastise the women, to call them immoral, impure, and evil, well, they're made up. Complete and utter fabrications. Netflix quite literally invented a victim narrative because the reality was not racist enough for their current year requirements. And worst of all, the made-up general, well, they present him as if he might be a real historical person, Lieutenant General John Lee. As when they show the women's division, or battalion more clearly, being unloaded off ships in England, they are asked to march in parade in front of a general. That was Lieutenant General John Lee. This scene is in the movie, but he is given the different name, Holt, here. And the worst part is General John Lee was not really much of a sexist or a racist. He argued in fact, that black soldiers should be integrated alongside white soldiers and should be treated the same in combat units. Oh, what a horrible racist he is. So either they are vilifying a man who did the precise opposite of what they claim he did, or again, they simply just invented a villain so as to victimize themselves. This movie can therefore best be described as Tyler Perry making up an argument in the shower and defeating his imaginary strawmen, who are indeed very, very racist. And this right before Christmas as well. I swear, nothing is sacred anymore, is it? And would the women of the 6888 actually wish to be remembered like this? Would they actually want to have a fictional victim narrative created for them to serve no other reason, rationale, or cause than 2024 racist agendas? Is that really the legacy you want to give to this group of women who did actually provide valuable service at wartime, who did actually volunteer in a country that at that time certainly did not treat them fairly? Frankly, I would think that they would have wished the exact opposite of their legacy. But hey, who cares, I suppose? Netflix got an agenda to push, and doesn't seem to care over much about whom it victimizes in so doing. As for the entertainment value of the movie, well, it's rather sparse. There could have been something interesting here. Again, perhaps an investigation into why the WAAC was so controversial, why the army objected to it, why men objected to it in particular. Or maybe a movie focused in on the enormous logistical challenges inherent in delivering a tremendous quantity of male to fighting men at the front line, in units always moving, and in units whose location often needed to be kept a closely guarded secret. And I will point out as well that actually the US Army had one of the most functional mailing systems in the war. The backlog after Normandy was, well, sort of unavoidable, considering the inherent logistical difficulties of moving everything you need, first usually from America, especially in the case of mail, then to England, and then to France, and then onto trucks, cars, trains, etc., to distribute it along the entirety of the front line. That could have been interesting, and to see how they solved some of the more unique logistical challenges, like, for example, when you've got a person with a very common first name and a very common surname. Alright, you've got 50,000 John Does. How do you figure out which John Doe this is, in which unit he is, where that unit is, and so on, especially when the writing on the package or the letter is damaged, smudged, or illegible? That would be interesting, and they found out some rather interesting ways of doing it as well, by identifying things like postage, like identifying gifts, textiles, identifying perfume smells on letters, or writing styles, making little identification cards for individual soldiers so that they could cross-reference them, and try to narrow down which John Doe this particular package was actually for. And we do get a brief smidgen of that in the movie, about a grand total of I don't know, 2 minutes total, I guess, in about 120 minutes of runtime. So, yeah, they didn't really focus on that. It is near 98% a pure race grifting movie, and it exists for no other reason than to be a piece of race grifting pseudo-entertainment. Netflix should be ashamed of themselves from continuing this nonsense all the way up into, well, now. Surely, we must be getting past this shit, right? And we can bring movies like this back to being shamed and generally despised as they should be. Till next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day, and Merry Christmas.